I am so honored for today's guest to even be here. The fact that he said yes to joining me in this premiere series truly means the world to me because I am such a big fan. I am slightly nervous to have this conversation because I just think that you are so brilliant, Jonathan, but it is truly such a pleasure and such an honor to have you here with me.
I mean, I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know Jonathan, he is the co-host of my absolute favorite podcast. It's Mayim Bialik's Breakdown. And a friend of mine a while back sent me a link to an episode and I listened to it. And then I don't quite remember how I ended up coming back across it, but you guys do the work that no one else is really doing. And that's what has made me such a huge fan. You are bridging science and spirituality. You guys ask the questions that I always want people to ask, but they never seem to. You have my absolute dream list of guests. You've introduced me to people that have then had such an impact in my life. And I just, I'm sure you guys get a lot of positive feedback, but I really would love to just start by saying that the work you do is so incredibly important. And I'm excited to get to know you on a personal level a little bit better.
I mean, thank you so much. I feel like I should be interviewing you to find out more about what you're listening to. We have such a wide range of guests that anytime someone is like, oh my gosh, I love your guest, I'm like, is it 90s stars? Is it physicists? Is it, people who have had crazy experiences? Is it health people? I think what makes our show us is that it's such a diverse range of people that we end up speaking to.
Yeah. And that's what I love about it. And honestly, like if you were to ask me in my background, the things that I love about it don't really make sense. My background is in health, fitness, and wellness. I had a fitness studio. I sold it 10 years ago. I still take care of myself, but I'm like, in terms of my continued growing and learning and in that realm. And then I have been business mentorship. I built a huge coaching business. I sold it a couple of years ago. And, kind of through I would say since about 2018, but like a whole new level in 2021, simultaneously running a big high stress business, I really dove down my own path of spirituality. And so to answer your question, I think, it's a little bit of everything. I love hearing people's near-death experiences. I love the scientists that you bring on. I really just love all of it, just in a way that like doesn't really make sense with everything else I've studied and done in my life up to date. So I don't really have a great answer for you, but it's amazing. And it's the way that you guys facilitate conversations that I think makes it really so special.
Again, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm always interested in the people who are very interested in spirituality, but also have a foot in the business realm, building organizations, building companies, and then selling them. Because for me, I think there's such a huge amount of intuition that goes into navigating all the different decisions, the interactions with people, the interpersonal problems, and then the business challenges to try to find the opportunities, know where to put your focus. Like, without running a business, we're making somewhere like 35,000 decisions a day, most of them totally automatically that we don't even realize we're making. And then if you're running a business and having to invest resources and allocate people's time, allocate the financial capital, both in investment and investing in people's time to accomplish a goal, then you're making so many other decisions, most of them you can get data, of course, and you can analyze with your intellect and you can ration it out, but often you're trying to navigate conditions that you can't really predict all the variables that are happening. And those variables are going to change 3 months, 6 months, even 18 months in the future, where you may set yourself down a course that totally doesn't pan out unless you're navigating with some high level of intuition.
Yeah. And that's absolutely something that I want to get into. This show is called Spirituality for Skeptics. I know your Substack, I believe, is called Practical Spirituality. So yeah. I feel like we're kind of thinking along the same lines here. And the intuition piece is huge. I have some questions maybe I want to get into in a few minutes, because I'm really just dying to know your background. Because, like I said, one of my favorite things about the Breakdown, your podcast, is the really rich conversations around the intersection of science and spirituality. And one of the things that really made me want to interview you, and that I find so impressive, is that you can have conversations with just about every single guest that conveys a deep understanding on your part about whatever the spiritual topic is, yet you still come across as very open and very curious. And so, listening to you have conversations with people like Tom Campbell and Michael Singer and people who I just think are so genius, and you just fit right along in with it. So I've read a little bit about your background on Substack, but also just kind of hearing anecdotes that you've shared on your podcast. I'm so curious, just if you can share a little bit about how you grew up, or just really how you arrived where you are with so much depth to your spiritual knowledge.
I mean, short answer, a lot of suffering.
I get that. Yes.
The long answer, a lot of exploration. I mean, I joke when I say a lot of suffering, because obviously I've had tremendous gifts and I'm very, very fortunate. And also I had, a handful of experiences in my personal life that led me to question what I was taught. And I think that's really where it starts for most people. So I grew up in Toronto, Canada. My mom was a teacher and then a psychoeducational consultant, which means that she helped develop curriculum and testing for children who were struggling in the education system. Mm-hmm. My father was an accountant and extremely rational. Like, we joke that he has a computer for a brain. He's the type of person who, when given a psychoeducational test, you have to reiterate strings of alphanumeric numbers. He tests so high that it's like that they can't use the data. He's like way off the charts. He'll give you 26 alphanumeric sequence forward and backward and be able to remember these like unbelievable combinations. So he just has, he calculates 1,000-line Excel spreadsheets for fun. Like, that's what he loves to do. And wow. He's just has a voracious mind. I grew up in a very rational, logical household, but it was plagued with mysterious health problems. I'm the youngest of three. My sister, who's 6 years older than I am, had a water ski accident when she was 11, which was an accident, but the extent of that accident didn't justify or explain the level of physical problems that she had from then on. And her physical problems actually just continued to get worse and worse until she was unable to walk upstairs. She was seeing doctors all over Canada trying to find answers to her mysterious illness. She was going to physiotherapists, and we actually had a conversation recently, or within the last month, on Substack, where she describes the feeling of really at that 11-year-old, her version of being 11, really felt like she was going to die in that accident, and that whatever was going on kind of got lodged in her, and she just wasn't able to process. Now, does that explain all the physical ailments to come? I can't possibly know, but it began to open this portal to the Western medical system. Doesn't have all the answers because she's clearly struggling being fully disabled. At one point she was in a wheelchair, and there's no real rationale for why an otherwise healthy young person would be deteriorating like that. So that was the first clue, but I think the larger, impact for me, because she was a little bit older, and while her symptoms were mysterious, and I knew that she couldn't do all the things that we were all doing as a family, and she became more and more consumed with medical treatments and new approaches to trying to help herself, she was always a little bit older and kind of removed. My primary relationship was with my older brother, who was 3 years older than me. And he and I were, all played all the sports together. We're extremely tight. And when I was 14, he was 17. He was injured in a single car accident where he was thrown from a convertible without wearing his seatbelt. And he landed on his head and had the most severe brain injury one can have and still live. And he went through 3 weeks in a coma, brain surgery first, 3 weeks in a coma, and then really 20 years of rehab that, again, sort of shattered my perception of what life was. We lived a fairly comfortable suburban life without any of those major catastrophes. And when that happened, not only was my family in a sort of traumatic reactive state, there was so much unknown and so much uncertainty. And, I began really a huge emotional process of being terrified, thinking if that could happen, what else could happen? What is the cause and effect of the universe? Is everything random and by chance? Or is there some logic, reason, understanding that one can have to navigate life? And add to that, the intense emotions and learning how to process, which I had no skills to do. It sort of became a window into discovering what else was out there. And I tell the origin story of sort of when I began to experiment and experience energy work. I've told it on the podcast and I've told it on Substack, but my sister, again, who's 6 years older, had a head start in learning how to navigate because her health plummeted after my brother's accident as the intensity of the stress wreaked havoc on her body. And she discovered yoga and meditation, and she discovered energy work, and she started doing Reiki and practicing somatic, like a form of hands-on somatic work. And I saw her life change. She went from being in a wheelchair. There was a moment where I think it was about 6 months after my brother's accident, maybe it was 8 months, where we were all walking through a mall and my parents were pushing my sister in a wheelchair and pushing my brother in a wheelchair. And it's like, what happened? It's like even a year before this wasn't the case. And then 2 years later, 2.5 years later, my sister was backpacking around the world, going on a backpacking trip through India with her then fiance. So clearly she had discovered something that was really powerful. I didn't quite understand it, but she encouraged me to go in that direction. And my experience of going to that 4-day workshop, I felt energy for the first time. It kind of blew my mind. I was like, what does this mean that the palm of my hand is pulsing and I can feel energy? And all of a sudden I can work on someone and my hand can be guided to a different spot in their body. And I can put my hand on their solar plexus after being up by their shoulders or on their head. And all of a sudden a huge emotion comes up for them and they have an image come to their mind or a memory come to their mind. And I started to see this really complex and beautiful interplay between the sensations we have in our body and the emotional, psychological information that we're carrying and how it comes through us or is held by us, and how that relates to potential feelings of, I don't want to say disease, but being unwell, where people can come with migraines or stomach upsets or hold serious pain in their body and realize that they're actually holding it. And through tuning in or having energy put there or having their awareness or breath put there, realize that they can soften that area, let it go. And all of these thoughts or memories or emotions will surface. And as they process their physical body changes. And I was lucky enough to have the teacher of that class kind of take me under her wing as a surrogate mom. And I spent as much time as I could with her for almost 4 years. And that world, entering that world, I was the youngest person in those groups. I was often with people in their mid to late 30s and 40s and 50s who often went to that work because they hit a wall in their own lives and they were struggling to navigate. And entering that space, I just got exposed to all different sorts of modalities that I just kind of pursued with all the curiosity that I think is inherent to who I am.
What an amazing story. And actually, it was making me think the first time I ever had a Reiki experience, I wasn't expecting much. But my grandmother, who had passed, came to me during that experience. And I was very close to her, but I hadn't really grieved her because she had dementia for years before she died. And it was kind of like she'd already been gone. But again, I was not expecting anything because I've done a lot. Like I've hired people for a lot of experiences, but yeah, I saw her and I kind of saw her in her prime. She loved to host parties at her house in like the 60s and 70s, and that's when I saw her, and she was so happy. And that's actually, I feel like, when I actually got to grieve her, and it was a short period of time, but yeah, I was just not expecting that type of experience. And so I so resonate with what you're saying. And how old were you actually when you started getting into these workshops and this type of thing?
I was 17.
Okay, so yeah, really young. But your career background hasn't just been this, from what I understand, right? You've done completely separate things.
Correct. Yeah. So I've sort of straddled. So that was when I was 17, and basically between 17 and 22, I spent as much time as I could in those spaces. For a while, I thought that was going to be my career. That's kind of the only thing in life that really made a lot of sense to me, because my family was still struggling a lot with my brother's recovery and how is he going to live in the world. And, you know, when you come back from a traumatic injury like that, there's all these social emotional complications, like where do you fit when there isn't really a world that is designed for you, and your friends have all gone off and have started relationships, and he wasn't in a place to do that. So I actually brought him into those spaces too, and I began to work with him. I began to volunteer at a cancer support center. I started a small business that was trying to bring this work into the business world. And I grew up in a very entrepreneurial household, and it was kind of expected of me to go to university, go to build a business of some kind or be a professional of some kind. And I didn't see a way to do that. Like, that wasn't what my skill set was. I didn't fit, like I wasn't a great student from that perspective. Like, I liked school, but not organized, not studious in that way. And so I went to school the first time. I dropped out. I came back, re-entered the healing and energy world, and again found a lot of comfort and acceptance there, and it made a lot of sense to me. I was waitering at the time, and then I went back to school about a year and a half later to a small liberal arts college where I just started writing, and I started working with a one-on-one tutor. It was a very small school, and you had a mentor that they gave you, and she was a poet. And I started writing again. And I'd always been very creatively oriented, but I never fit into the school system. So as a second grader, I was diagnosed with a generalized learning disability. It was always really, really hard for me. I couldn't spell. I had a lot of ideas, but my spelling was bad. My grammar was bad. My sentence structure was all over the place. And it was very challenging for me to read. I was learning 3 languages in the first grade, and I was learning Hebrew, English, and French. Hebrew made a lot of sense because it was very phonetic. French and English did not make sense to me. And so I always felt like an outsider. I felt like, oh, there are these kids that can do this stuff easily, and I couldn't. So I didn't know where I fit in. And when I went back to school and university in my early 20s, something clicked for me. I'm like, oh, I can do this. I can write. I got a lot of help, and I got a way to express my ideas. And then I got introduced to a technology that translated text to speech. And it was one of the early programs. We now all have that ability on our computers. But back then, it was a special program that you put on your computer. You would scan your books. The school would chop off the bindings of the books, run them through a high-speed scanner, and then give us a CD that could be loaded into this program. And all of a sudden, when I could listen to my textbooks, my curiosity and really intense appetite for information, I had an ability to process it. And so all of a sudden, I felt like, oh, I really enjoyed the academic world again. So I ended up going to university. After that, from that college, I went to a 4-year university. I ended up taking English and literature, and I caught the film bug. And what I loved about making film was it was just like this really big communal project. And the role of a producer is basically overcome every obstacle in your way. And when someone says no, find an alternative. And that just really spoke to me. And so I kind of put the spiritual side down and just went full on to let's make as many things as I possibly could. I went to grad school to the American Film Institute, studied screenwriting, I was producing, and then I got into the real world and started to try to write. And I was sitting in an office by myself for the most part writing. I got an agent and a manager, and I was hired on some jobs to write screenplays and to break stories for producers, and started producing our own content. And it was great, but like it was 2009, the industry was shrinking, not the way it's shrinking now, but it was changing. And it became very evident to me that I needed something else, something more communal, something more collaborative and more entrepreneurial, because it felt like as a writer, you're constantly at the behest of someone's to say yes to you. And I really dislike that. So after a lot of soul searching and trying to figure out what to do next, and actually during that process, I went back into the spiritual world. I connected with a community in Los Angeles, and sort of another whole world opened up to me, which is a bit of a dog tale. So I'll streamline into the entrepreneurial side. But I went to Toronto, Canada, and joined an innovation and design agency where I was working directly with this CEO, and they did really interesting work on the future of different products for really large brands. So we did the future of digital products, we did the future of grocery stores, and we helped a really large protein company divest out of being only meat and look at protein as a whole source. We did the future of the connected home, where we were looking at like how washing machines and refrigerators would talk to each other. And we started exploring in the very early days in 2014 and 15, how the artificial intelligence would start to come into organizations and change things. So well before the tools of today, but already looking at inventory management and personnel hiring and how it's going to change customer relationship management. And so we were doing really interesting work, and I started an agency inside of that company making films, and we grew it to a 15-person department. And I was just really focused on how to build the creative world. That my time there transitioned by spinning out an agency of our own in order to service artificial intelligence clients. And we worked for a lot of firms doing B2B work and trying to explain how these different technologies would be scaled and used across large organizations. And during that process, again, a lot of production, a lot of creative work, a lot of writing. We incubated a concept for a startup, and my co-founder and I raised capital to build that product that we had envisioned. And we built a large team and did that for 4 years. And at the same time I was doing that, I started the podcast, and the podcast sort of came full circle with a collection of skill sets where it was a lot about building media and storytelling. But then we got back into a lot of the spiritual conversations that were really part of my time before going back into the media and writing and production worlds.
Yeah, that's actually a perfect segue. So thank you for sharing all of that, by the way. And I had read on your Substack about the learning disability, which is always so interesting to learn about someone that you perceive as, such an intellectual. So I think it just goes to show, like whatever happens when you're a kid, or, all of that stuff can be overcome for the most part. And, all the family stuff is super interesting. And when you first started the podcast, it was, again, correct me if I'm wrong, it was really to help people with their mental health as things were kind of breaking down through the pandemic. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it was. I mean, my interest in mental health, besides my own personal struggles and feeling a lot of hopelessness, both when I didn't see a path for myself fitting in at school, when I didn't know how to apply my skill sets. There was a lot of time where I felt super creative, but didn't know how to turn that into a business with offerings and client management, and how to scale that. So I had my own personal experience, but then throughout the work I was doing, I started a documentary that looked at how the design of our cities impacts our well-being. So everything from how much is spent on parks and public spaces, to the services, to the noise level, to the light pollution, to walkability scores, and even to the incentives of apartment and construction building, where we're so isolated. It doesn't make sense for there to be a communal space on each floor of an apartment building with like a shared room where people can actually know each other on each floor. Like you lose so much square footage and value that you would turn that into another apartment. So I just really believe that like behind almost every problem, there is some misaligned incentive structure that is prioritizing things that are not for our well-being.
Yeah.
And how do
that
you
makes
balance
sense.
those
Yeah.
two? And so Mayim was also in her own journey at the time looking at mental health. And we sort of came together with these interests and said, there's so much misinformation. There's so many people struggling, especially in the wake of the pandemic. What can we do to try and contribute positively to that?
Yeah. And I think you've done a fantastic job. When you were first getting into this, was it clear that you would be doing, okay, mental health, but also taking this heavy spiritual angle, or is that something that
No.
evolved? Yeah.
I mean, I always wanted a neuroscientist to explain the things that I kind of believed in and felt, but couldn't explain because I just don't have the science background. But I think, and she is interestingly quite spiritual in a way that she's often not as public. And I think she's probably changed lately to be much more public about it. But I mean, no, that was never really like a conscious plan. It was like people believe that, oh, you're supposed to do a podcast and you're supposed to try to get names that people recognize. And so it was more about that. And when we had Michael Singer on, it was because she and I connected and reconnected after 6 years of being not in contact through his book. So that was like a really meaningful guest for us to have. And we both had a relationship with his book outside of our personal connection to each other. And then also, if you look back, I think one of our early interviews was with Kunal from Big Bang Theory. And his interview was extremely spiritual and philosophical. He ran his account, Buddha and Jeans, for years. And he tells his story of his transition or his overcoming really intense panic attacks. And how he did that was through spiritual study. And he shares that with us. And it's to this day, in the top 5 of the most watched episodes. So if we look back at the trajectory, there was definitely something there signaling us that we were going in this direction, even if we didn't realize it at the time.
Yeah, I totally relate to that. It's funny because I see my spiritual journey as initially starting in 2014 really subtly, and then another subtle thing in 2018, and then a lot bigger stuff starting in 2021. But that's like my perception of it. Cause when I look back, I created content every day on social media for my businesses for years. And I see even all those years ago, before I was aware, I was using the language, I was sharing the concepts, but in a way that was like almost subconscious or that I wasn't aware of. So it's so interesting. Maybe, and perhaps that's how a lot of it starts for people, is like this subtle, almost unawareness of language, ideas, whatever. And then it just kind of grows and blossoms as our awareness grows, or we become ready for it, or I have no idea, but I definitely resonate with that.
Why spirituality for skeptics?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And actually, you're doing a really good job. I have a handful of questions for you, and it kind of leads me into the next one. So, and I'm going to touch on intuition here, but I'll give you a little bit more background. So,
sure.
I would describe myself as like 80 to 90% believer, 10 to 20% skeptic. And I was personally raised without any religious or spiritual framework. I remember when I was 4, lying in bed, and I was thinking about dinosaurs, and I realized that dinosaurs were here and now they're not. And so I asked my mom, I said, and my mom was raised Jewish, but by the time she was 12, she said she wasn't into it. She wasn't having a bat mitzvah or anything like that. So So I asked my mom, I'm like, well, what happened to the dinosaurs and what's going to happen to me? And she goes, well, and she didn't mean to scare me, but she told me when you die, you turn to dust. And that was absolutely terrifying to me. And I remember crying myself to sleep for like days afterwards. And I grew up here in the South. I'm in Asheville, North Carolina. And so, I was surrounded by friends who were going to church and things like that. And I never understood what it was about. I tell people, and this is true, I did not realize that Christmas and Easter were religious holidays until I was in college. I thought Christmas was the day kids get presents and Easter was the day kids get candy. And that's just what it's always been. And so I had really none of that framework. And so my kind of journey into this, so to speak, really it's funny because I'm going to question intuition here in a second, but it really started intuitively and ending a marriage that was amazing so that I could kind of go on this other trajectory in my life, into all the business decisions that I've made, because business coaching is not my background. I, like you, have a degree in English literature. I was a high school English teacher, and then I went and got a master's in Holocaust and genocide studies. It's a winding path, entrepreneurs, right? And so as I started it's just kind of like life put the right people, the right coaches, the right mentors, the right ideas, and the right experiences in front of me. And I've been working almost daily with my personal spiritual guide and mentor, who's also on the podcast, for almost 5 years daily. And I'm like, I love her, couldn't live without her. And I'm like, okay, what if what if none of it's true? Or, I've done work with psychedelics and I have these amazing insights and experience. And I'm like, okay, what if I just made it all up? So there's really this part of me that wants certainty and truth, even though I know that I can't get that in this human form that I'm in. So this is actually really more for me an opportunity to meet people like you and to facilitate conversations, that are going to help not only others, but also me get more solid in what it is that I believe in my own pathway, if that makes sense.
I mean, I can totally relate. I think anyone who is actively seeking should constantly also be questioning.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is where kind of my question about intuition comes in. And I'm kind of thinking about how I want to frame this. So for someone like me, I had a lot of success in business. I got myself, by my early 40s to where I don't have to work anymore if I choose not to. Right. So this is really something that feels like a calling for me to be doing with this show. And so I'm like, okay, I've made a lot of good decisions in life. I'm proud of what I've created. I'm proud of the people that I've helped. And I can appreciate my intuition when it happens, either in a more passive way, like, oh, I just made that decision and it happened to work out. Or I can look at it in hindsight and be like, yes, that was like very intuitively guided. But when I'm actually looking for guidance, right, I struggle to hear my own intuition. And I think a lot of listeners are potentially the same way. And I know this is a big part of your work. So one of the things that I did want to ask you is really, like, how did you start to hear your own intuition? How did you learn to trust it? What is that experience like for you?
It's a big question.
Yeah, right.
Well, it's huge because I don't think it's a one size fits all answer, just like I don't think waking up is one size fits all. I'm it's hard for me to turn off my interviewer mindset because like I have so many questions back for you,
Right.
which I think actually leads,
whatever.
which I think actually may lead us to these revelations or these insights, because you mentioned starting to have some experiences in 2014, and then there's another one. And I think most of us are on a path of increasing our connection to some force. Call it our soul, call it higher self, call it moving beyond simply operating only from rational information alone and starting to feel more, because there's a collection of senses that we all have, but most of us are cut off from them. So how do we start to develop intuition? Simply by starting to realize that we have more senses than we're currently using. There's more information for us to access. but it's not often a simple path, meaning that when I started to explore my intuition, I started using muscle testing and I started using tuning in. So how do I tune in? I try to quiet what's happening inside of myself because my mind is very fast and very loud. And if I'm only operating from that rational mental space, then I can't access the full amount of information that's available. Because often intuition speaks in a different voice than my rational, logical mind. And so I had to start to pay attention to what is that voice? And is it telling me something out of fear, or is it telling me something for me to be confident to take a leap?
Yeah. And that's a tough one, right? My boyfriend, who is also on the show, he does a lot of work around subconscious programming and all of that. He always talks about the line between instinct and intuition. And it's something that I definitely wrestle with. I think with a lot of this stuff, I look to almost prove myself wrong. You know what I mean? Like, oh, well, I thought it was going to be this and it wasn't. So I must not be able to trust myself or whatever, right? It's like I can use those little moments where I'm seeking and I get it wrong or whatever, and just completely discount everything else that has landed me to what I feel like is a great life I get to live. It's so weird how we do that, but that's part of the reason for
a lot of people who are struggling are like, well, all I have is bad decisions because look, my life hasn't turned out in a way. I can't point to all the success mark. And then I think that becomes a really slippery slope too, because you then bias against, I think we're programmed. We know that we're programmed to bias towards the negative. So what does it look like to start to say, what does yes feel like for someone? And yes may not lead you to the outcome that you imagine, but it may lead you to an outcome that is better than the alternative.
Yeah. And, sometimes like my mentor, she likes to remind me that, okay, I might perceive this was a failure, this didn't work, but I'm not seeing the thing that it was really meant for or who it was really meant to impact. So then it becomes this whole new line of like deciphering things and, what the purpose of it was if it didn't work out the way that I wanted it to. But yeah, I think just getting consistency of practicing quieting the mind. And, then there's the whole trust layer of it, right? Like, I guess, how did you learn to trust what you receive when you're listening to your inner voice?
A lot of practice and repetition, a lot of trial and error. And I think we're all connected to something that is guiding us to some capacity. Sometimes the information isn't always available in the moment that we're demanding it. And I think timing is a huge, huge piece of this. So I think there's a few things that if someone was like, I'm trying to develop my intuition, don't know how to do it, I kind of always feel stuck, like, here's the checklist that I would do. Number one, whose voice are you most connected to? For me, I had to disconnect in my early 30s from my parents' voice. Every time I would really try to tune in, I would almost feel their voice like around me. And I'm kind of having, if you're just listening, like I have my hands up around my head because I was so ingrained to think in a certain way that I would have to clear their energy. And I believe that we're all interconnected, especially in our family lineage. And how do we make enough space for ourselves energetically so that we know who we are? We're programmed by our parents. We're programmed to think what our friends are going to think. We're programmed to think about how it's going to look on social media. If I leave this marriage and I don't have a reason, how is that going to look to all my friends who thought that I had the perfect life? And who am I to walk away from something that seems really good? Well, if you just over and over again in your heart, in your soul are like, this isn't a match. It's not feeding me. There's not the connection that I truly want. It's preventing me from living the life that I'm meant to live. That's information that we can't access if we're constantly bombarded with the expectations, the shoulds.
Yeah, actually. And one thing that you're making me think of is I think the voice that really bombards me is the ego voice. And it's probably the same for others. I don't necessarily have a lot of outside influence, but I have like that ego voice that's full of fear and, all the negative possibilities. I think that's the one that is the block for me if I had to identify something.
And so we'll bias to stay in something that's challenging versus, well, it could go wrong if in this way, it could go wrong in that way. Well, how could it go right?
Right.
But we don't know how it could go right because we're programmed to only understand our current experience, which is, oh, I have this safe space. It's working well enough. Where do I step out from there? So that's would be the first one for me. The second one would be, is the information available for me right now to know? If we're in a matrix like Thomas Campbell talks about, and I don't mean matrix like the movie, but I mean like we're in a complicated system of interrelated parts. So number one, am I receiving information from the right source? Thomas Campbell explains that there's your consciousness, there's my consciousness, and then there's the collective larger consciousness field.
Yes.
If I'm trying to make a decision, and let's say I have a friend, Bob, and the decision I'm trying to make is related to him and I. If I sort of put my attention outside of myself and say, give me guidance, where does guidance come from? You know, it may come from an internal knowing, but I believe guidance also is information out in the world. And so if I'm looking for that information and I put my attention out into the world, I have to make sure that I'm not accessing Bob's intuition or Bob's intention for the outcome of that event, and that I'm clear. So one of the visualizations that I do, which is related to number one also, is to be a clear channel and to remove influence. And this is what you said, am I making it up or is it real?
Yeah.
There's so much making it up in spirituality that is very real.
Yeah. That's hard for my brain to figure that out and to trust that as well. Yeah, I hear you though.
Of course, right? Because we don't want to believe that we're deluding ourselves. But the placebo effect is very real. We know that when we feel safer, whether objectively we're safer or not, we have a physiological reaction. So how is that not also true with the clarity of our decision-making or our access to intuition? I spend, in the visualization process can help us quiet that constant nagging of our rational mind, who is very impatient.
Yeah.
So if I clear myself and I envision Bob's energy moving away, expectations moving away, the unknown moving away, and I try to make space, what do I fill that space with? I want to program that space that the right decision is easy and clear to hear, that I'm guided towards the things that serve my highest good, that there is a trust and supportive network in the universe that I'm connected to. If I only believe that there's misery, I have to suspend that long enough to connect to something that has a more uplifting and positive potential for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as I do that, then I can access what Thomas Campbell describes as the larger consciousness system, and I can start to feel what is uplifting, what is motivating. And we have to be careful here too, right? And not allow ego to say, well, you're going to make this decision and then get a Ferrari.
Right.
That's probably not accurate. That could be a delusion in the other realm also. We have to start to feel, and then when I ask, is the information available to me? Sometimes the world needs to turn, right? Like if you're making a business decision and you send in a counter offer, should I call them right away and ask them to make a decision? The decision will probably be different than if they're able to sleep on it, feel into it, see if their competitor comes back with a higher bid. Like there's an order and a timing to life that I know for me, I tried to rush a lot.
Yeah.
And as I became more patient, my intuition became easier to hear.
That's a great point. Yeah, I think we all struggle with patience a little bit. So yes, I hear you. I'm taking notes. Did we go through the steps?
I think those are the two main ones. And then practicing in micro ways, like sometimes it's subtle, right? Practice with things that are low stakes. Practice creating the space to listen in low stakes. So it's like, hey, actually, normally I go this direction, but I don't want to go that direction today. Or question things that may seem automatic. If you're in the same constant routine, you only go this place, or you know what, Tuesday I do this. Like, well, should I do that? Someone invites me out. Well, I don't want to say no. Question that. Start to ask, what is for my highest good? And even think about a little bit, what does highest good mean to you? Start to develop a relationship with the understanding that you're here for a purpose. You can be guided to connect to that purpose, that you are in relationship with your intuition in a larger system that can reveal things to you and have really happy surprises that help your life become more interesting, more enjoyable, more connected, and more adventurous.
Yeah, that's a beautiful perspective. And so much of what you're saying is, it's like, I know, but it's hard to accept. It's like there's so much magic in the mundane and in the subtleties, right? It's like when we look at this idea of awakening, we want it to be this one big, powerful, explosive event that changes everything. But really, it's something that happens all day, every day. So, even when we look at spirituality or, Jonathan's spirituality, you are obviously so knowledgeable and an amazing spiritual teacher. But I think you would probably agree from what it sounds like, so much of this has actually come through the subtleties, the quiet moments, and more of that mundane stuff. So I think a good question is like, okay, you're all into this, you've been into this most of your life, but what does spirituality look like in a daily practice for you on some random Tuesday? You're tired, you're overwhelmed like the rest of us. What does spirituality look like for you then?
It's a really good question. And it's almost easier to say what it doesn't look like, because I struggle with that every single day, with looking to distract myself.
Yeah.
It's so easy to listen to fill every day, every moment of a day with listening to something, with watching something, with doing something. It's really, really, really hard to tune in. And so I would say for me, spirituality is being able to find time, even in small moments, to tune in and tend to my inner world. That we are programmed and we are sold because there is an incentive structure that profits off us giving up our relationship with our internal world to consume and interact with external stimuli.
Yeah.
It's the most powerful business in human history. There's never been one greater. It's running the majority of the economy. The top 10 companies of the top 50 companies on the stock market are all attention-driven economies.
Yeah,
and
totally.
We're struggling because their goal is to suck every moment of our day, and we all walk around with these computers in our pockets that give us endless opportunities to drive little moments of dopamine. And like, I don't want to be that person, right? Like, I don't want, it's like such a sad story to be like, our devices are making us sick. But for me, that is absolutely the truth.
Yeah, I agree.
When I'm able to put it down, like last night, it did not sleep in my room. This morning, I texted Mayim. I'm like, I'm going for a walk with the dog. I'm not bringing my phone. We have forgotten how to live in a way that gives us the opportunity to feel calmer, to feel more expansive, to look at things. It rained where I was last night, and this morning we woke up and it was foggy and had dew everywhere. And there were these unbelievable little spider webs covered in dew on like all through the meadow where I walked my dog. And you're just like, look at the sophistication of that. And it's unbelievable. It's little pieces of art everywhere. So we have to retrain ourselves to feel a level of enjoyment, wonder, and awe with things that are from the natural world and are not like this unbelievable video of something exploding or outrage for this thing happening, because those emotions just rob us of our ability to feel calm, to feel peace, and to have, for me, a connection and a sense of something greater.
Yeah, I agree. And I live in the mountains of North Carolina. I spend time in nature pretty much every single day. And it's probably the most important practice that I have. And, I'm old enough like you to remember I didn't grow up with cell phones. Texting wasn't a thing until I was in my 20s. Social media was it came out when I was in my mid 20s. And I can remember a time where we didn't have that, but I don't remember what that felt like necessarily, like with just having that compulsiveness to check the I think part of the reason I was so stressed in my business is just like, people can reach you on a multitude of platforms at any time, and just always being on and available. And yeah, I agree. And I love that you brought up the point of nature because it is that thing that can really bring us back to ourselves. And I love what you're saying also that I just want to highlight for people, because when it comes to like rituals or spiritual practices or whatever, if someone tells me this is the practice that you need and you need to do it in this way, I feel very stressed about doing it if I can't do it exactly how it was prescribed. So I love kind of what you're articulating is that, it's not about having this whole like 3-hour morning routine or whatever. It can simply be integrating thoughtfulness and small little practices throughout every single day that can ultimately make a big difference for you. Even as someone who is what I mean, I don't know if you consider yourself this, but I would consider you to be, some type of spiritual teacher. So that's helpful.
I mean, I don't think about it. It's very kind of you to say. I would also say, like, what is the practice that you can actually do?
Yeah, exactly.
There was a time in my life where before every meal, I sat down, I took a breath, I put my hands over this meal, and I just added an intention
Yeah. Yeah.
that the food is there to help fuel my body.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just grateful. Like, these things sound almost trite to the person who's hustling, who's going through their day, who's building a business, and I want this productivity. And I've been that person, and I've been totally burnt out, totally dejected, been totally stressed. And I have lived at the edge of dopamine burnout for so many years as I hustled as hard as I possibly could. And every time I do that, I crash, I burn, and I come back to spiritual practice. And the only way that I've learned how to be productive now, being an entrepreneur, building businesses, trying to be creative, is to integrate both sides of my life. It takes you nothing to take one breath, even if you don't set an intention, to take one breath before you eat and just be like, isn't this unbelievable? This is the first time in human history, in recent human history, that all of a sudden this food is so accessible to me.
Yeah.
Like before this podcast, I fried some eggs. I had some lentils in my fridge. Like 200 years ago, that was unbelievable.
Mm-hmm. It's crazy.
It's profound, right?
Yeah.
So like, we don't have any context. Like our world has become so frictionless that we've lost perspective about how blessed we are.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, I always think that too. When I would be teaching my students like business coaching stuff, and just how amazing technology is, we'd be talking about. It's like even 100 years ago. I mean, cars were like just recently a thing, and there was, no TV, and it's absolutely incredible, and it's a good point. I think it's, obviously in many ways the best time in human history to live with access to healthcare and ease of food and all of that stuff, but it's also probably one of the more stressful times for the majority of people in a way that it never has been before. So, what you're talking about in these practices are more important than they've ever been, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I'm also really curious about like having people explore their creativity in whatever form that looks like, because I believe we are all versions of creative beings where we will learn more about ourselves, more about our relationship with intuition through some form of creative practice. And it can be anything from, I think, reading and consuming information is creative, writing is creative, art, playing music, listening to music, things that are pushing us out of passive engagement.
Yeah, I love that. And you do a lot of that creative work, right? Between the podcast, your Substack. We'll give you a plug here in a moment. But the last question I have for you, and then we'll circle back to that, is, based on the work that you're doing now, based on everything you learned in this spiritual realm, if you could sum it up, what is the one thing you would want people to know?
Well, that's a very, very hard question.
I know. It could be a little bit broader, but whatever comes to mind for you.
I actually think the reason that I create content is because I don't know what that is, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I had to summarize it, I would say that, we don't know why we struggle, but the thing that you think you're struggling with is not the end.
Mm.
That there's more to that story, that there are more opportunities to evaluate it, that we can all feel a sense of calm, a sense of interconnection, and a sense of wonder.
Yeah.
Like, I'd challenge people to say, when was the last time you looked at something and just was like, wow, like this is kind of unbelievable. And by doing that, we can actually change the chemicals in our body and how we feel. So looking at the way we think, the stories that we tell ourselves, by really working on how you interpret the world and yourself and the world around you, your entire life can change.
And that is a beautiful way to end things. And I agree with that sentiment entirely. And this has been just, again, such a pleasure for me to get to know you better. I hope that, when people who love the work you do, as I do, listen to this, they get to know you in a whole different way, because I think our story and the context of how we came to where we are with our knowledge, with our work, with the moment that we're in, is really so important. I think our stories are what can really help change things for other people, even more so than, the technique or like the specific teachings and things like that. So again, just super, super grateful. And I would love for you to share where people should come. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people listen to your podcast on Mayim Bialik's Breakdown, but tell us where people can find you otherwise.
The podcast, Mayim Bialik's Breakdown, anywhere you get podcasts, or on YouTube. Mayim Bialik on YouTube. And then my personal channel is Practical Spirituality on Substack. I have conversations like this. I have conversations about about if you're skeptical and you don't know what to believe, how do you navigate that? How do you take spirituality, which I think for so many people, they associate with being removed from society. Mm-hmm. Living off grid somewhere. And I think that a lot of us who are in the world, of the world, trying to build and create and parent and be a part of our community, can take these practices and learn how to utilize them to improve our lives.
Yeah, I love that. And definitely, I could talk about this and move on to, whole hour or two. This was wonderful. I have learned so much. I can't wait to go back and listen to it myself. And I look forward to continuing to listen to what you put out. I just have lots of respect for the work that you do. And again, just my deepest gratitude for being here with me.
Thank you so much. And I'm really excited to see the growth of this podcast. You're clearly awesome and talented at it. And I'm just excited to see where it goes.
Thank you.